How's it going, Jim? It's been probably a year at this point. I mean, I think at this point you come on once a year, and it's been too long since we last
And
talked.
remember, Joe, I think this is my third time, although it may have been fourth. Time flies so quickly.
Maybe. Honestly, it might be your fourth. I mean, I think I had you on where we talked about your background and everything, and then the next time we were talking about your books, right? And you just had your third book published. Congrats on that. I mean, again, I'm not a big physical book reader, and I'm not a big fiction reader, right? And I mean, it reads so easy. I'm very impressed with how you write it, with how you construct it, especially with it being such complex topics of espionage, right?
Well, you're very kind, Joe. Thank you. I enjoy writing it. I can't run CIA operations anymore, but I can fictionalize and live through my characters, and that's what I enjoy a lot.
Yeah, yeah. No, I could definitely tell that, and I feel like, just from talking with you and hearing other interviews and whatnot, I feel like there's several different characters in the world that you've created, right? That kind of resemble different aspects of what a successful, case officer might be that you've experienced firsthand in your own career, right? And, it's an interesting way to talk about those topics, right? Because you can't talk about all the stuff that you did, right? You can only really talk about like one, event, one monumental event in the world that took place. But it's interesting to like hear it, like hear the book, or read the book, right? And then vision it like, oh, we talked about how he would go on runs, right? We talked about your runs. And then in your book, one of the main characters is going on daily runs, right? Which it provides a whole lot of different facets. Maybe I'm reverse engineering it too much, just from my technical mindset, right? But just thinking of the counterintelligence division of the FBI views this run completely differently from how this completely American, fully loyal to their country is taking their runs, right? They're taking their runs as like almost a mental check-in, right? Less about actually, doing anything harmful to the country or even developing an asset, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, they say write what you know, and I've been a runner for about over 49 years. And so a lot of my characters, not surprisingly, are runners. And I think each one of the characters in my three books, there's at least one character who's a runner. And I'm not running at the moment. I'm just power walking. And I miss the running terribly, except in the ungodly heat we're having here in Northern Virginia. I don't miss that. It's true, being a runner, long distance runner, which I started way back in 1975, it has certainly been a big part of my life. I used to consider my various CIA operations when I was running. I occasionally would attract what I would call a target out on a run with me. And you get to know people very almost intimately when you're running with them.
Yeah. Yeah. When I run, I haven't really put much time into running lately, and my excuse is having two little kids and getting my PhD, right? So I don't really make excuses, but that's my light attempt at an excuse, right? So I can't really find the time right now. I ran cross country, I ran track, and then I ran all the way through college and beyond, not for a college team, but just in college, right? And whenever I go on really long runs, I find it so mentally beneficial, far beyond the physical benefits, right? Of your health and whatnot. But I feel like I always refer to it as working out the demons, right? Because for me, for my brain, for me to go on a really long run, we're talking 15, 18 miles, something like that, right? I have to keep my brain completely occupied the entire time. 100% of the time has to be occupied. Otherwise, I start talking myself out of running because I hate it.
You're right. No, it's a great time for reflection, for meditation, in my case, I've the last few years I've used it to construct dialogue for my characters in my novels. And whenever I come back home, I always quickly scribble down my thoughts lest I forget them. They slip through that all too porous sieve of my brain. And so I use it for all kinds of things. Nowadays, as I said, I'm more into power walking. By that I mean trying to do like a 16 or 17 or an 18-minute mile, which requires a lot of focus to walk that quickly. And so, and especially if you're in a hilly area like I am in McLean, Virginia, it can be challenging. But I get out, I do it. It's really healthy for you, both physically and psychologically. And I still get not quite the runner's high that I did, those mental endorphins. I do still feel good about myself. And I come back and I want to write down what I've been thinking about. So I know exactly what you're talking about, Joe.
Yeah, it's the endorphins part, that running, that runner's high is addictive, like I remember when I was training for the marathon, there's specific days of the week that you take off, right? And on those off days, I would be sore, but I would be so frustrated that I couldn't go out running or shouldn't go out running, and I was thinking to myself, like, man, like I actually hate this thing, but I'm sad that I can't do it. So how much do I actually hate it?
I have that feeling. And on the days when I couldn't run, I'd be in a depressed mood, snappish, and, that kind of usually I would do my running early in the morning when I don't obstruct anybody, don't take up anybody else's time. Besides the fact that it would be cool and dark and felt good just to go out and do that. But yeah, a lot of my characters are that same philosophy, not surprising.
So, I gotta ask you, okay, so in your book, right, this counterintelligence team, identifies your main character as being a potential mole, right, in the agency. And I don't want to give away too much, but it's also very like hinted, in your first paragraph of your first chapter and whatnot.
Mhm.
In your experience, can you talk to how that is really, managed or mitigated? Because I'm thinking about it from an operational perspective, right? Where you're somewhere, you're in another country, right? You have an operation that you're running. You're trying to, gain targets or assets for a certain goal that you're trying to fit, all while being investigated by this counterintelligence team, great professionals, very well skilled and everything. And I'm trying to think through, because the actions that you would take to gain that asset, to gain that resource, would probably look very suspicious to a counterintelligence team. Right.
Exactly.
And so, how do
Absolutely. It's just what James Jesus Angleton, the CIA chief of counterintelligence, called the wilderness of mirrors. It was, I mean, what they're looking for, what the counterintelligence team is looking for, especially the counter espionage CI team is looking for, is a spy, just like the type of people I recruited, and looking for what would be the motivations for somebody to be a mole. And as I've told you on previous programs, there's all kinds of reasons for espionage. The most salient one typically is revenge or ego. And so they're looking for, why would this person commit espionage? And it's the same thing that I would look for in my targets, because I'm trying to convince them to become moles in their government. So it really is like that endless wilderness of mirrors, where you're looking to try and cause something, and other people are looking at you, trying to decide, are you the person who's leaking? Are you the person who is revealing who our assets on the other side are? And I was in my book, in my new book, The Traitor's Tale, at the acknowledgments, I talk about the fact that I was betrayed by a friend of mine named Ed Howard, who defected to the Soviet Union in 1985. Ed and I had been friends. We had dined in each other's homes several times. I was jealous of the fact that he was selected by our then called Soviet European Division so that he could have a tour in Moscow, one of the most difficult places to operate in the world. Is right in Moscow, under the nose of the then KGB. And I was jealous of the fact that they selected Ed out of our training facility at the farm to go to this elite first tour of Moscow. And they gave him Russian language training at Georgetown University. At the same time, I was getting consular training from the Foreign Service Institute. And I was more than a little jealous of Ed getting this plum assignment. And then I was shocked about 2 years later. I came home from a trip. I was in Bern, Switzerland. I came home from a trip, and my wife, Ellen, said, Ed Howard called today and he asked for you, and you weren't here. So we chatted for a while. And she said that he quit the agency and is now working for the New Mexico State Legislature. And I thought, why would he do that? Well, what I didn't know was that Ed had all kinds of suitability issues. He had drinking problems, substance abuse problems, and he also had anger management problems, including one egregious incident on an aircraft, on a commercial aircraft, where a woman who was seated next to him, who had a small baby, And that baby was being very baby-like, crying and stuff. I know you know that with two small children. Well, she gets up from her seat and goes to the bathroom with the infant, leaves her purse there, and Ed is so angered, he rifles her purse and steals $20. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's got some real issues. So the agency fired him. Basically, they fired him. They found him a job with the New Mexico State Legislature, but that wasn't obviously suitable for Ed. He was so upset, he ended up volunteering to the Russians, and in doing so, he betrayed our one of our most valuable assets, the one that David Hoffman in The Billion-Dollar Spy wrote about, Alfred Tolkachev. Tolkachev had revealed all of the Soviet avionics designs, things like that. It was calculated that it would have cost the Department of Defense, our Pentagon, over $1 billion to develop these same things that Tolkachev gave us. Well, Ed betrayed him. Tolkachev was shot. And also, he betrayed everybody he knew, including myself. So when I went from my third tour several years later, I was going to go to another post in Scandinavia, and we always do a counterintelligence write-up where headquarters does a description of what your cover exposures have been. Who knows that you, in fact, are CIA? Well, so I got a copy of the cable, the write-up that they were sending to my new post, and they send a courtesy copy to you at the old post. And my copy read simply, betrayed by the traitor Ed Howe. Whoa. And sure enough, Ed had told the KGB who I was because I could never get any of the KGB officers out one-on-one with me because their counterintelligence chief said, stay away from Jim Lawler. He's nothing but trouble. And he was right. I wouldn't be nothing. I would be nothing but trouble. But it's a terrible feeling to have, a guy who I thought was my pal, my buddy, and he basically stabbed me in the back and said, yeah, Jim Lawler, he's a CIA officer. You better stay away.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine the betrayal that goes into that. I mean, you're putting your life on the line every time you go out of the country. I mean, probably even technically if you're in the country, right? Like you could be a target of something, right? A foreign adversary. And you're risking everything going over there. Maybe it's even a benign trip, right? And a colleague is going to betray you like that, knowing full well that your life is on the line. I mean, that's really hard to compute for me.
I know, but the feeling was, it really was like a cold knife in the back. And then years later, in fact, it was only I guess about 8 or 9 years ago, well after my retirement, I decided with my wife that we would take a Baltic cruise. We would visit Sweden, we'd visit Finland, and we'd call in the former Baltic republics and in St. Petersburg, Russia. Well, I still have a clearance, and my headquarters said, no, you're not going to Russia. So we docked in St. Petersburg, and I stayed on the ship for 3 days while my wife went ashore. It was a Viking cruise or something like that, but I stayed on the ship. And then more recently, and I guess it was in January or February, I had a visit from not three, but two female FBI agents who came to my house, and they said, Mr. Lawler, we want to give you an advisory that you should not travel to Russia, China, Cuba, or North Korea because of the operations you were involved in. And I thought, well, okay, none of those are on my bucket list, fortunately. So I don't have any plan to go there. But you got to watch where you travel because I'm well known to some very hostile services.
Yeah, that is, it's interesting, right? So I've never done anything, as awesome as you have, obviously. I mean, I just have a podcast, right? But, I was talking to a vice admiral of the Navy one time, and my traffic in China and Russia and all of those allies, right, our enemies over there, all just black holed my traffic after Russia invaded Ukraine, in 2021 or two at this point. And the traffic